Hello and welcome. We're broadcasting from a DIRECTV Red Zone studio in Los Angeles, California, on a very important topic. This is about veteran suicide. DIRECTV is engaged in an initiative called S.A.V.E. It stands for Suicide Awareness Veterans Engaged. We're highlighting this very critical problem because in very short, we're trying to save veterans' lives. And what we're going to learn about today and what we're going to talk about with an amazing panel is we're losing a lot of veterans to suicide, a lot more so than we lose veterans in combat. And our trends aren't looking to be going in the right direction. So we're in search of what are the root causes? What are the solutions? What can we do? And when I say we, I'm talking about the collective we. This is everybody's problem that is an American. This is everyone that's in a government position. This is everybody that works for companies. This is our citizens, friends, and neighbors. We all have to get engaged to fight this problem because it is a problem that warrants all of our attention and it probably warrants all of our action. Now, I want to go through a few data points before we get into the panel. Then I'm going to introduce our amazing panel, and then we're going to get into some Q&A and learn a little bit more about our causation, what we know about this problem, and ways that we can all work together to solve it. So first, just to get our purpose of this initiative, what we do here at DIRECTV is really just to provide a safe and inclusive environment for all veterans. That's incredibly important to us, and it's needed in this community. We also want to raise awareness of these risk factors like suicide that affect veterans. We also want to put up support solutions for veterans in areas of need and improve the lives of all veterans at all times. Now, speaking specifically to suicide, I want to go through some of the more salient data points to highlight why we're doing this. So if you haven't seen this data statistic, this is through the Veterans Administration data of 2019. We're currently pacing about 22 suicides per day. Every 65 minutes, a veteran sadly takes their own life. In addition to that, if you look, these slides are even more sobering. 120,000 plus since 2001, so many veterans have died by suicide. And since 2006, there's been an 86% increase in suicide rate among veterans 18 to 34-year-old. And 23 times, by 2030, the total veterans of suicide is 23 times higher than the number of post-9/11 combat deaths. So in short, we are losing a lot more veterans to suicide than we will in combat by 2030. And as we'll talk about today, our trends are getting worse before they're getting better. Another reason that we wanted to highlight about this problem is more exacerbated in the veteran community than it is in the non-veteran community. There are reasons for that I'm sure we'll get into during our panel. But veterans are at 2 times higher risk of suicide than their peers who have not served. And we will, as we talk about it some more, this is our third panel that we've done on this topic. And in the previous 2 panels, some of the things that we learned and that you'll hear us talk about today in our panel is this has to do with purpose and a belongingness score. And that plagues veterans a lot more than it does the non-veteran community. But also what we've learned is that the root cause of this and what causes somebody to get down a mental health path to commit suicide is not very much different from a causation standpoint for non-veterans as it is for veterans. But because it ties into that purpose, that belongingness score, it's more pronounced in the veteran community. And we'll talk more about that in our panel today. So with that, let me introduce our panel. We have one member that's virtual and the rest of the members that are live with me in studio. Our virtual panelist is Dr. Bill Nash. He's currently a consultant for the United Nations. He's also leading the development of a comprehensive program to prevent and manage PTSD in peacetime operations. Previously, Dr. Nash was a clinical and research psychiatrist at the VA Greater Los Angeles Healthcare System and a health sciences associate clinical professor at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He also served previously as the Director of Psychological Health for the U.S. Marine Corps and 1st Marine Division. And while he was on active duty at the Navy, he was in charge of a combat stress control psychiatrist. He was embedded with 1st Marine Division in Iraq. The doctrine for maintaining psychological health in military operations that was written by Captain Nash in 2008 still informs the training throughout the U.S. and Marine Corps, U.S. Navy and Marine Corps today. And next, we have Tess Benko. She's a project director of the U.S. Vets for the West Los Angeles VA Housing Redevelopment. It's part of the Veterans Collective team. Previously, she was the director of the innovative UCLA VA Veteran Family Wellness Center, the first center of its kind in the nation serving veterans and their families with resilience-based wellness programs alongside the VA. Tess, like myself, is also a former Marine that suffered a devastating spinal injury at the age of 22. In addition to the background and the work that she does with veterans and the fact that she's a veteran herself, this is also a very personal topic for Tess, because Tess also lost her husband, who is an active duty Marine, to suicide in 2004. Next, we have Sergio Cuevas. He's a program manager for Emerging Vets and Players. I'm sure we'll talk more about that organization a little bit later today, but that organization creates an environment to share both veteran and athlete strengths and experience to support each other in building fulfilling lives of service. Also a former Marine and combat veteran who served in the Marine Corps for 9 years. He's also was a recipient of the City of Los Angeles Certificate of Appreciation for Veteran Service in 2017. Next, we have Dawn Jackson. She's currently a platoon leader for the Mission Continues. I'm sure we'll learn more about that organization today as well. Mission Continues deploys veterans volunteers to work alongside nonprofit partners and community leaders to improve educational resources, tackle food insecurity, and foster neighborhood identity and more. She's also a former veteran of the Air Force and was an officer. So that's our panel, and so now to introduce myself, my name is Mike Wittrock. I'm the Chief Sales and Service Officer for DIRECTV. I'm a former Marine as well. I served for 16 years in the Marine Corps, and I was in Operation Desert Storm and in Operation Iraqi Freedom 2 in 2004 and 2005. I've had veterans, friends that have committed suicide, and I've lost some of my brothers in suicide, and that's what has really given a personal tie-in of this very important topic to myself. So with that, let's get started with our panel. So I think my first question is going to go for Dr. Nash, who's virtual. And Dr. Nash, I know you were with us last year, and I appreciate you supporting us again. And last year, what we talked about is the data from the VA is a little bit of a data lag. We only had data through 2019 on veteran suicides. And at that time, it showed the trends, the veteran suicide rate coming down slightly. But as we talked about on last year's panel, we had predicted that that was not the case because of the pandemic and what that was doing to veterans' mental health. And since then, we've also seen an Afghanistan withdrawal, and we've seen a cry for help from a lot of Afghan veterans. So with the prolonged pandemic period and with the Afghanistan withdrawal, what do you see in your work where these trends are going, if you could call the ball through 2022?
Great question, Mike. First of all, let me thank you and your team for inviting me to be part of this again. I've gotten a lot out of these conversations in the past. I'm glad to be here again. So I agree with you. First of all, I don't have any data, so I don't know what our current official rates are, but I expect them, if anything, to be going up. If the mental health tail of wars is very long, it's decades long. But over time, as veterans of combat and other experiences either gradually get better over time or they die, over time, as you get further and further from active conflict, as we are now, we're no longer deploying people to active conflict. If everything else were equal, we would expect the rate of mental health problems, including suicide, to gradually go down over time. But there's at least three huge factors, I think, that are pushing it in the other direction. You mentioned the pandemic. The pandemic continues to take, I believe, a significant toll on the health and well-being of veterans and their families, both directly because of the added stress in their own lives, mothers trying to, work while they're taking care of their kids at home because their schools are closed. I mean, we all know how horrible this could be. And the further down in the food chain you are, the more acute and extreme those stressors are. So it's the impact on the mental health of the veterans and their families, but also the pandemic decimated the healthcare system worldwide. And as healthcare systems were overwhelmed by the pandemic and by fears of healthcare providers' own fears of contracting the disease and being killed in the workplace, they worldwide, and especially and unfortunately, including in the VA, mental health services was considered in many places the most expendable, the thing that we could do the best without. So I am absolutely certain veterans have had a much harder time accessing care over the past 2 years. But then there's two other factors that have driven my veteran patients totally bonkers. Additional life stressors. If the pandemic wasn't enough and their ongoing chronic mental health problems weren't enough, you've got the politics in this country, which have become so brutal, and then you got the war in Ukraine. Oh my gosh! I can't tell you how many of my veteran patients in Los Angeles have tried to go over there to fight, and they have no business doing that. But it's so. And there's another stressor that the last thing I want to say to answer this question about reasons why the suicide rate, if anything, may be going up. The thing that brings veterans into mental health care is usually an added life stress. So, they reach some level of homeostasis and they're kind of managing their lives. And then something comes along and smacks them in the head. They have a new stress in their life, and then they decompensate, they become suicidal, whatever. And you know what is, over the last 4 years working in Los Angeles, what one of the most common stressor events that brought veterans back in being suicidal themselves is learning of a fellow veteran's suicide. Veteran suicides, because, as you said, it's all about belongingness. And if you've lost your sense of belonging to the military, to other things that you used to value, sometimes all you have left is your veteran peers, and you hold on to them tightly. And to be learning, and this is every single veteran patient I have can list for me the names of the people that they know and love who have killed themselves. And that is a huge trigger for suicide in others. So I don't think we're out of the woods.
Yeah, and one follow-up question I have, and I'll ask the panel if they have anything else. As I was listening to you go through your list, Dr. Nash, about the pandemic, the taking down of healthcare resources for people with mental health, not just veterans, but it sounds like sort of across the board, the politics and the divisiveness in the country, the war in Ukraine. The only reason I mentioned the Afghanistan withdrawal across the top, and I have a lot smaller circle than some of the panel has, but I've heard from a lot of veterans about the Afghanistan withdrawal and people that it started to affect their mental health about what they did. And these are people that didn't ever show signs to me of having mental health issues before or previously. Am I thinking that's bigger than it is? Or is that something that you're experiencing and seeing as well?
Absolutely. The Afghanistan withdrawal has been for many veterans a cause for moral injury, right? That what they used to believe in turns out not to be the case. They thought that we were there for a higher purpose, and now it doesn't seem like maybe we didn't accomplish very much at all. And so, that seemed to be a bigger issue for my patients a year or two ago. I just think all these new things coming along have kind of pushed that into the back seat. But absolutely, that is one of many sources of moral injury. Moral injury is all about feeling betrayed, and betrayals sever relationships and attachments and trust. And if you lose trust in the country, you lose trust in the VA, you lose trust in your fellow veterans, whatever, that's when your belongingness shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until there's nothing left.
Anything weigh in on the rest of the panel? Pretty good answer. And thanks for returning and supporting us again, Dr. Nash. I think I'll go to the next question to you, Tess. I love the work that you're doing, by the way, and let me just say thank you again for returning, and I know you're expecting, so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Your organization helping tackle veteran homelessness, and I think these two issues that we're talking about are so closely intertwined. Hearing Dr. Nash a moment ago, it's hard to have purpose. It's hard to feel like your belongingness score is coming up, that you have trust in something if you're homeless. So I think these are very closely intertwined together. So how do you guys just sort of approach it? How do you identify veterans in need, and how do you conduct your work? Because I think you might be onto some of the same root cause solutions that we need to be seeking for this broader problem.
Absolutely. Well, here in Los Angeles, unfortunately, it's known as the epicenter of veteran homelessness. So on any given night here in Los Angeles, there are roughly 4,000 veterans who are homeless, unsheltered on the streets. So that in of itself presents a pretty unique challenge in being able to, first of all, identify those veterans. Here in Los Angeles, we use the point-in-time count through LASA, and we're able to identify them in that way. We have something called the by name list, where veterans who have been identified can be on a waiting list for housing. But overarchingly, what we're seeing is that housing is impacted in the region. And you see that from the soaring prices for housing, the costs associated with housing. Sometimes veterans may have additional challenges such as not having the credit score to obtain housing, those types of issues, or perhaps they've been homeless for a long time. So there are problems like not having the proper identification, benefits lag, not having those things in place. And then also there's a component to it where the social support is not there, which can make it even more challenging for homeless and at-risk veterans because they don't have other people that they feel that support them as they're either becoming homeless or have been homeless for a long time. So Dr. Nash touched on socioeconomic factors that are very important to pay attention to, but also there's housing stabilization. So again, that is, what is the inventory in the region? What is the affordability? How can we help veterans get and stay housed? And so it's one thing to be able to house veterans. There are different types of programs. Some of them are housing-based. There are voucher programs. There are project-based voucher programs, including the ones that I'm working with at the West Los Angeles VA campus, which will be the largest veterans, homeless and at-risk veterans community in the whole country. So it's about to become home to 3,000 plus veterans, their family members, their certified caretakers. But in addition to having that housing, what's really important is having the supportive fabric of community wrapped around that. And so that goes back into some of the things that Dr. Nash was talking about, like the quality of healthcare, being able to support veterans and have them support each other through things like peer support. And there are just many other pieces to it that do speak to that question of belongingness, the identity. Who am I after I've been homeless? Your mission, what is that now? And the meaning and the purpose behind life after the military. And transition, because transition's really a spectrum. It's not just right after you get out of the military, you're constantly transitioning into something new for many, many years after you get out of the military. And as we know, risk factors for suicide don't always happen immediately after transition out of the military. It can take years.
Did you say 4,000 to 5,000 a night?
Yes.
My goodness. Well, if it's the epicenter of veteran homelessness, you have to become the epicenter of some of the solutions. I love what you said about it's not just a home, it's about social support, it's about health resources and other supports, about peer networks. I think that's a good segue into Sergio here, because that's what you guys are working on, emerging vets and players. So, it seems like a great way to help this problem, and tying into a lot of things that Tess said and that Dr. Nash said. So just how do you guys approach this problem, and what do you do to try to create those peer networks, create that social support? Because you do it not just for veterans, but also for athletes, because you see a very similar problem with both. So just how do you guys approach it, and what are you working on?
So our approach is really just like you said, peer-to-peer support. What we do is we just bring veterans and professional or transitioning athletes that are coming out of their sport, and we just align them. We do a workout, and we have what we call the huddle on the mat. And that's where we get to talk about all of our struggles that we're going through. You know, a lot of us that are in the program, including myself, when I first came in, a lot of us were homeless, living in shelters or, you know, couch surfing, like we like to call it. And it was very difficult. So to be able to come in to a location where we get to share that, we've been able to really hold each other accountable and build each other up, find our purpose again, remind ourselves that just because we're not on the field, in the ring, or in the military anymore, doesn't mean we're still not great inside. Like, we still have the potential to go out and do amazing things. And so to be able to support one another, pump each other up, build each other up, empower one another, we've been able to go out and get homes, get jobs, support other veterans, support other athletes, bring them in so that they can see that there is more to life outside of what we've done before, right? We've been able to be leaders in our communities before. We get to be leaders in the community again. And that's something that MVP's been able to do, and we're just continuously growing. We're about to open up our A chapter next month, later this week in Phoenix, and we just continuously grow. During COVID, it was very difficult. We had a lot of veterans that were suffering because, like Dr. Nash said, you know, the mental health system went away, and we switched to online, and we just had an influx of veterans and athletes that just came in because they were having a hard time. There was a lot of fear in the community, in the world, in the country, and being able to bring everybody in and share that with one another and let each other know that you're not alone. We're going through it too, and support each other. That's where you're gonna get a lot more effective in your recovery from transition.
Are you seeing some success stories on veterans in your program versus like pre-program? I mean, are you seeing this really work? Are you seeing this peer network really start to bring up their purpose, the belonging score that we're talking about? Some of those you could talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, we have plenty of veterans and athletes that, they really come in, in a hard place. They're really struggling to find their purpose and, being great, world champions, and not knowing what they're going to do because they're no longer in that position anymore. And, to be able to support them and get them on a path so that they can go out and help others, it gives them that purpose. It reminds them they have a mission now, and it gives them something to drive for. And we're getting a lot of veterans that are really making a new turn. I mean, from fighting sobriety to getting back into the workforce to finding a home to not just doing that, but also picking up their brother next to them or their sister next to them and saying, hey, come with me, let's go do this. They align with their goals and dreams in life after military or sport, and they start working on these projects together. And to be able to do that, they get to grow more. And that's kind of what we've been doing, since we started, and it just continuously grows, and super, super excited for where we're going next.
Well, to stay on the topic of peer networks for a minute, I'll go to you, Dawn. You guys, thanks for coming this year. You guys hosted us last year. We did this Zoom because of the pandemic. We had to be virtual, so I'm so glad to be back together again. Similar question. How do you guys approach it? What are some of the success stories you're seeing? Because now you're staying on the same topic of peer support. And it also ties in to all the other things we've talked about. How do you help them get mental health resources? How do you help with social network that tests married up? So just kind of how do you approach it? What are some of the success stories you're seeing?
Yes, thank you, Mike. So in terms of success stories, I guess I would have to say I'm one. I was part of the Service Leadership Corps Cohort 4. We call it the COVID cohort. So it was all virtual. Before that, everyone flew around the country to create that unity and community. Honestly, I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise because I have a young child. I had just suffered a major loss at the beginning of COVID in April 2020. So much so that I had to call the Veterans Crisis Line in the summer of 2020. And I got connected with VA services through telehealth. There was a long wait, but we were able to work it out because of that. And after getting out of that depression, I was looking to get back into the workforce and lightly. And then I joined Mission Continues in tandem with that. So this was a way for me to create family where I felt like I lost in the past. I didn't claim my veteran status for a very long time. I was new to LA, I was from New York, and I have to say I really credit them with saving my life. There has been a new narrative written for me with this new family I have. I know we use the word family, and that could be healthy or unhealthy, but it really is supportive. It really is a common purpose. It really is about, reaching in and getting that value out of the human capital that we have that common language in. I started my mental health journey as a practitioner, but I'm also a consumer. I started with the New Directions for Veterans on the VA campus. So one of the reasons I did that was to have this common language, not just for my story, but how it's received, right? And what the well we put into. We've done service projects throughout COVID, and I have to say that I've met people that don't even, have anything to do with service, but everyone comes from a community. Everyone's somebody's mother, brother, colleague, friend. And so it's really created a home for me. And it's something that they come back for every year. So yeah, I have to say that I'm a success story, and I hope to sort of bring other people in. I went to Mount St. Mary's here in Los Angeles, and the next class. So it's something that they can do for their service hours, and just continue the conversation, because we all have purpose, we all have meaning when we come up with it together.
Well, thank you, and thank you for sharing your story too. And it sounds like that is a great success story, and I appreciate all the work that you guys do. And when you were answering that, it made me think of another side to this problem. And I know we're kind of bouncing here between causation and solutions, but there's another issue that I've learned about through this panel the last couple of years. Is, one is this belongingness score, this purpose, kind of where it starts. But there's another problem we've identified, that veterans aren't raising their hand for help with mental health. And, Dr. Nash talked about earlier, so the resources kind of went down during the pandemic. Some of that's coming back to life. But even when the resources are there, there's an issue of not raising their hand. I know a lot of veterans that talk about this magic phone call, and it's where somebody gives you a phone call and you get the feeling very early on that it's their last phone call, that they are at their tipping point, and you got to take it very seriously. But it kind of begs the question: why didn't the problem didn't start in their mind in that phone call? It started sometime in the past, or when they get out, or in this evolution of transition, to use your term, Tess. So for anybody watching this, or anybody that's a veteran, what can we do to get at that problem? What can we do to convince more veterans it's okay to raise your hand and get help. It's okay to engage those resources. It's okay to engage your peer network about it. Just generally for the panel, whether it's Dr. Nash virtually or any of you here, how do you guys think about it, and how can we do better to help with that problem?
Well, one of the things Dr. Nash brought up before too is disillusionment with the system. The last 2 years have been rough on everyone, and really asking for help from veterans, right? So there's a lot of pre-intervention, post-intervention, that just keeping them in mind, just using their skills wherever they can, staying active. And so when people are disillusioned with their life, who don't see hope for the future, that you give each other that hope just on a daily basis. Yep. Just what's going on in the community, what resources do we have? It's sort of stone soup. We're all in this together. If we don't always feel that way, right? And so veterans have a very unique way of being situationally aware, and it's not something you can turn off, right? But that frustration of not being able to take action weighs heavy on you, and disengagement and all those things. So just saying, what can we do together, right? That call doesn't have to be about suicide. It could be about anything, but just making it part of, let's do something right now, I need your help, or this common language that we all have.
Yeah.
I like it.
I definitely agree with that. I think prevention and postvention are very important parts of, saving lives and helping to empower people to be able to say, yes, there's an issue here. I think also, though, asking the question straight out and asking the hard questions, being okay with being uncomfortable, because it's not comfortable to ask these questions. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you have a means? Do you have a way? Do you have a plan for this? And asking those questions straight out, and then not only asking them, but knowing what to do. So having done the work of, looking for resources, looking for a next course of action, having supportive phone numbers or places to refer to, and then staying the course. So even if you can't be there with that person, ensuring that they have a support network there for them, making phone calls while you're sitting there with them and showing them that you really support them. Because it is challenging. Stigma is a huge piece of that. A lot of us veterans tend to self-stigmatize. I know for me, a part of my story is that I eventually was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. I suffered military sexual trauma in the military, and like so many women, I shoved it down. And I pretended it didn't happen, and I pretended it didn't happen, and I couldn't stop it from coming out at some point. So my body just reacted to a stressful situation. As Dr. Nash was saying, there's a precipitating factor to it, and it all just came exploding out of my magical basket of gifts from my military service. So, yeah, that's what, magical basket of gifts. But also on top of that, at that point in time, I was a mother to a young child. I had a daughter, and that was very challenging because I hid it even more so to avoid potentially having my child taken away from me. I didn't want anyone to know how sick I was, and so it took me longer to get help than it would have because of that fear factor, and then also having structures in place to be able to access help while still being a parent.
I like that. I like some of the things you said about you know, it's okay to ask questions. If people are watching this and it's okay to ask those questions, it's okay to find out where they're at. If they have a social network to help them, if they're engaging in the right resources, it's okay to do that. It's okay to say, how are you doing? And try to pull that, like all of the veterans and non-veterans alike, when they're engaging with veterans, it's okay to do those things and start to bring some of this out. Get to that sort of mental health check and make sure they're doing what they need to be doing to take care of it. Because I do think that if we don't have a lot more hand raisers, we're not going to be able to use these great resources to our advantage, right, to help with this problem. Dr. Nash, anything on that topic?
Yes, thank you. I love the comments that the panelists have made so far. And two things I want to say. First of all, peer support personnel, veteran peer support specialists are, when they work well, when they do the job well, and they connect well, they are the most amazing gift to veterans' mental health. And one of the main reasons for that, obviously, it's establishing trust. And, when trust is very low, it takes a person in front of you, kneecap to kneecap, convincing you that, you don't work for the VA, you're not representing the government, you're here for them. So, but there's something that peer support specialists, I think, can do for veterans who need mental health care and maybe are having difficulty accessing it, is helping them navigate these horrible bureaucracies. Even in the best VAs in the country, and they're all different. If you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. So even when the resources are there, it's very hard to get access. And somebody who's had a trauma, who's had losses, who's suicidal, they're not going to raise their hand and ask for help because they don't feel they deserve it, right? So we have to say, yes, you do. And I'm going to stay by your side until you agree with me. So I just want to say that helping navigate the system, helping, troubleshoot. Okay, so you went to see this person and they blew you off. They didn't listen to you. They didn't understand. They made it seem like it was your fault because you weren't doing the right kind of coping or whatever it is they're throwing at you. So it's difficult, but, that's what I do as a psychiatrist. But in some ways, peer support specialists are even more effective at that in, kneecap to kneecap, saying, here, I'm going to help you work through this, or we're going to find somebody for you. And along those lines, in order to do that in your community, you need to find the go-to people. You need to find the mental health providers and the social workers and the housing specialists who give a shit. Right? Who you can trust your clients with.
I love that. Go ahead.
I'm glad he said that, so now I'll feel more comfortable if one slips out. I kind of want to touch on a couple of things, actually, because, Tess mentioned, stigmatized, right? as a peer support specialist myself with what we do at MVP, you know, that's one of the biggest things we face. A lot of the veterans, a lot of the athletes, a lot of the communities don't want to come out and, you know, say they're going through stuff because when you hear PTSD, it's automatically you're stigmatized, something's wrong with you, right? What we like to tell our members, what we like to tell our community is it's okay to not be okay sometimes. It's okay to have a bad day. Like, we're in this society where if you're having a bad day, people think, oh, you're angry, you know, something's wrong with you. No, it's okay, I'm just having a bad day. Just keep moving, right? Keep going. And as a peer support specialist, sometimes getting them to understand that, hey, I'm going through it too. You know, I've been stigmatized as a veteran and a father and a combat veteran as being unsafe around people because I went to combat. Okay, sorry, I went to combat and served my country, but I'm a nice guy. I'm sensitive. I'm caring, right? I know how to love. And so to be able to get veterans to and those around us to just say, you know what? Yeah, I'm having a bad day. It's okay to have a bad day. What do I need to do? What would you need to do? Help guide them. Validate their feelings. Validate what they're going and what they're believing and how they want to approach their own health and how they want to get better, and support them through it through connecting them and supporting them in the decisions they make, because that's what we do at MVP. You don't want to do something, you're having a hard time at the VA, you're having a hard time here. What do you feel that you need to do to make you feel better? Okay, as long as it's something healthy and it's going to make you happy, cool, let's go do that, right? Let's go find that tool, right? Come work out with me. Let's go hit the gym. I need to hit a gym or something, right? You know, finding some kind of approach to be able to do so. And so stigmatizing, you know, PTSD and the mental health is definitely important that we get away from. And I think that's something we all have done in the past, and we need to get away from that, because a lot of people don't want to. I mean, I've taken a job with the county and people were like, oh, you were in the military? And it was like instantaneous, oh, something's wrong with you. Well, no, nothing's wrong with me. I'm actually a really nice guy. Like, okay, I served in the military, right? But because we've done that for so long as a community, it's taken away from us, right? And it's hurting our efforts to make this better and to get those veterans to raise their hands and say, I need help. Something's wrong. Something's not right now. And so that, again, working with the peer-to-peer support, going out and saying, I've been there, I know that, I've been in that situation, I've been homeless, I've been, you know, villainized because of my PTSD, I've been stigmatized because of this. Like, I know what it's like, I've been there, this is my path I took, what do you feel you need to do to get you through your path? That's how you're gonna get more and more veterans to go out and get the help they need.
I like the, for the viewers today, I like the broad reach of cohorts that we're talking to, and we've kind of touched on a lot of them if you think about it. I mean, if you're a veteran that has struggled with some mental health, if you're having an issue with purpose, if you're having an issue with belongingness, you got to raise your hand and get help. You got to talk to peers, and you got to have a good peer network, and you got to know that you're worth it. Back to Dr. Nash's point. If you're somebody that's in a good place as a veteran and you've found that platform and you've found, you know, that social network, how do you help your peers? Asking the tough questions that you talked about, Tess, and how do you make sure they've got the right resources? Help them navigate the resources that Dr. Nash talked about. Work with organizations like yours to build those peer networks and how they help someone else. We also talked a little bit about companies. If companies and non-veterans are working this, how do we break down the stigmas around veterans, to your point? But something I've learned a lot about over the last couple of years too, and now we'll go into another cohort that this solved. And Dawn, we were talking about this backstage in that the survivors. And so I talked about the 22 a day, and Dawn brought up a really good point backstage. She said, it's far beyond that when you get into the survivors. And I've learned of some interesting things. There's some stigmas that they're battling too. Because some of the survivors and the families, they don't want to put their loved one's name up on a pedestal of if their local town is doing something for Afghan veterans, they don't want to put their name up. They don't feel like that person's worthy of that status. And I was just really shocked to hear about this stigma. We need to break that down. But let's talk about the survivors a little bit. And there's organizations and help for them because they're going through a lot of challenges with this as well. With this problem, the families that are left behind, Are you guys having to work with this, or anything that message that we could have for them and the survivors and what they need to be doing to sort of put their journey back together, because it starts over again for them as well? Anything on that from your standpoint, Don?
Yes, so as Tess was saying, these difficult conversations need to be had. Right now, veterans are gathering this data, doing this work, having these difficult conversations because we're allowed to be unapologetically ourselves. But at the same token, we also are knowledgeable and have the resources available because we like to be at the ready. We like to be, suited up. So with that, we are actually helping everyone, right? If we do this together, then we can share it with everyone else. So saving veterans saves everyone. And it's a very unique opportunity. For myself, during the difficult conversations during BLM and George Floyd and everything like that, the Mission Continues actually tackled those issues with us, right? I was sitting in my home. I could have been isolated alone, but instead I was talking to people all over the country, from Florida to Maine. We have 40 different locations, and we were working this out together at our own time, at our own pace, and our own journey, and respecting each other. Right? And we dropped a few bombs here and there, but it was all good. That's how we do. But you really have to go through the process. We've all tried to avoid things in the past. That's where stigma lives, and stigma is just destructive. Yeah. Right? It erodes away at the fabric of what binds us together. And so, tackling it carefully, consistently, and making that unity in our community around like causes, around working out, around planting, painting, building, whatever we can do to get our full body engaged in it. And like you said, our PTSDs, we've all gone through trauma on some level. Before I was diagnosed, I always had the symptoms, I say, right? And so it lives not just with me, it lives in my family, it lives in my workplace, it lives everywhere. And so the more we talk about it, the earlier we can identify it and the more we can tackle it together. So veterans are very brave in that regard. And anybody who has a family member lost to suicide, there's no reason to hide it, right? Yeah. We're inviting you. Please help the rest of us.
No, I love that message, especially for any of those that are watching. I've gotten close to a few people in our company since we've started to do this. I was surprised at not just the veterans that sort of came forward and wanted to start different conversations, but the survivors, families. And I could tell that there was a bit of a cry for help there too, that they're going through some immense challenges and they don't know how to think about it. So I love what you said. It's okay to admit it. It's okay to get help. It's okay to build that social network. And just like Dr. Nash said of the veterans a moment ago, the survivors, they are worth it as well. And they've got to focus on that and be courageous and to admit it and to get help for it and to talk to people about it. So I love what you said. Anything else anybody in the panel would weigh in on?
Inclusiveness.
Yeah.
Inclusiveness.
Shame.
As of last week, 56 members of my battalion have taken their lives since we've been back from Afghanistan. And that's just from my one battalion. That's just my first battalion I served with. I have several of my friends that I was active duty. I took a phone call from a friend of mine who was struggling. I asked a hard question, denied, made a plan to be with him the next day. Everything was agreed upon. Got a phone call at 4:30 that morning. He had taken his life. I have a friend who, because of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, was trying to help one of our interpreters come back. And as soon as the withdrawal took place, felt like we were abandoning our interpreter and our allies, and took his life. We stay in touch with their families. One of our great member, great friend, I love her to death, Margarita Reyes, actor. She's a huge advocate for survivors of suicide, veterans that have taken their life. Her brother took his life, one of the first ones from our unit. And she's super supportive and active in MVP, and we embrace every single one of the family members because they need to be included as well. And with her help, we've been able to do a lot of things. And she was actually one of our main supporters and contributors to our movie coming, the MVP the movie, and because again, a lot of it's based on my battalion, the battalion of a lot of our members and staff that work with MVP. And so to be able to include them it gives them an outlet as well. It gives them purpose, right? Because they want to save lives too. They don't want other families to go through what they're going through. And so being inclusive to the families is absolutely important, and finding something for them to help with and support them and honor them and their loved ones is going to go a long way.
Yeah. And drawing families into prevention as well. So I think that's an important piece of it, not just looking at the individual service member or veteran, but looking at the families as an ecosystem, and how trauma reverberates through families is really important. As a survivor, I learned that you're more likely to die by suicide yourself because you've been through that experience, and I don't think that gets talked about a lot. That experience for me was very challenging because there are no answers oftentimes. My husband, when he passed, he did not leave a note. So it was just out of the blue. It was out of left field in a very difficult situation. And at that time, which was back in the early 2000s, we had TAPs for survivors. But there was definitely a rift in the community where there were questions like, oh, did your husband pass through combat? And if they didn't, there was just this tremendous sense of shame attached to it. And even going, through the funeral, that whole process, family members were afraid to say what had happened. They would say something like, oh, he passed in his sleep, which also made it challenging, as a surviving spouse, because it was like, I don't want to talk about this and then have it impact them as well. So it's just, there's a whole bunch of things wrapped up, in that particular conversation, but definitely something that needs to be considered.
Of prevention, and I like what you said about inclusiveness as well. And my gosh, Tess, you're fitting a lot of categories that we're talking about here, survivor, but thank you for sharing that. I think, if somebody's watching today, and I think there's a lot of lessons that we covered there to not forget about the survivors in this. That's one. I like what you said, Sergio. If you have a friend that you happen to have lost through suicide, don't forget about the family. If you had close interactions for them, now extend that out to family, no different than if the loss would have happened in combat. Because we separate that treatment sometimes, and help that family, help them with prevention, help them with inclusiveness. And I hope the people watching today really heed that lesson, and let's not, they'll be on the veterans, because now the chances of somebody in their family committing suicide, to your point, are also much higher. And so we've got to extend that treatment out and be a little bit more inclusive about it, the way we address it. I also think, and I learned this at the Marine Corps Marathon years ago, I think people should be, survivors should be proud to talk about their loved one. I think it's perfectly acceptable, and I want to hear your points of view on it, for somebody to come out and say, I lost my father, I lost my husband, I lost my mom or my wife from suicide post-combat in Afghanistan or in Iraq. I think it's fine to talk about that. Held them up as heroes. They're no different than if they died in combat. And I think that a lot of people don't do that, and I've learned that. It's starting to change a little bit, but I think that's perfectly okay, and I think that's a good message. Would everybody agree?
Yeah, Mike. I do think that suicide in the past was seen as something that might phase out, and with the numbers showing it's growing, it's here to stay, and that suicide itself is not always the tragedy. The tragedy happened long before that, right? And so people are living in the wake of it. People are living in going into it. So saying anything that is, I don't have a vision of a future that I could see myself in, right? Building a world that we all want our children to thrive and grow in. I think the last couple of years has really laid bare a lot of that nobody's safe. Like whatever you thought was going to be is not, right? So we're all going through this adjustment period, and it changes every day, And so just understanding that, being humble, being vulnerable, sharing those difficult conversations in a respectful way, I think will help everyone a lot.
Absolutely. I think definitely having them focus not on how they passed away, but focus on the positive things they've done, the life they lived, right? That's one thing that everybody focuses on when somebody takes their life is how they did it, right? Okay, it happened. I'm sorry. Like let's grieve. Let's mourn together, right? But let's also celebrate how awesome they were, the awesome life they had, the awesome life that they contributed, right, to the world when they were with us, right? And I think that's one thing that I like to do with the families that I communicate with. You know, every once in a while, I'll grab some photos of, you know, the grandchildren that are out there, and, you know, or some deployment photos. I'll go through and I'll be like, hey, I remember this day, and I'll share like a little story. And I always give enough so that I don't overwhelm them, but also keep them happy and make them understand that they are loved still, and they are cared about still, and they've done amazing things. And just like we do with our members that are with us, right, and still participating in the program, they are great still. It doesn't take away, it doesn't diminish the life they lived. And I like to continue to do that with the ones that I have lost, right, and their families. And I do that with the members. Like, you are great. Just because we're not there doing what we used to do, what we loved, our dreams, our goals, we're just taking that greatness and we're applying it to a new purpose, right? And we're taking that greatness that they have, that, you know, that they left with us, because we all get something from somebody that we lost, right? We all get a little something from them. And I'm going to apply that to something. It's going to carry on through me. And that's what I like to bring to the families.
I think it's an important point. I like the focus on the accomplishments, focus on the individual and their life, not how they died. I got to think that also helps them with their own sense of purpose and the struggles they'll go through, like you were talking about, Tess. If I raised a child that ended this way, if I'm focusing on the accomplishments in the life of that child, that's got to restore my purpose as well and keeps me away from some of my risks. So I think that's an important point, how it ties in back to what you were talking about, Tess. You know, I think we've covered a lot of good ground here. Maybe sort of for the final question, if somebody's watching today, and let's start with the veterans group. Somebody's watching today and they're a veteran. They're at whatever stage they're in of their evolution of transition, to use your term, Tess. What's our kind of message, anybody weigh in, to them on what points they need to focus on to really get through this journey successfully?
That's an awesome question. And obviously, what is needed in every situation is going to be different. But overall, the one thing that I would want to address first is trying to attack their self-blame, right? Stigma is a social set of attitudes and beliefs about the worth and value of a person because of, you know, a stigma means a blotch. It means a stain. It means something's happened in your life that makes you somehow less a member of the human race. You have less value. So I think the first thing you need to do is to attack that. And one of the tools that I use is to communicate to them and teach them really how much of this, what they're experiencing, is biological, and it's based on injuries, literal injuries. And I think that's a crucial way to think about these things, as stress injuries, psychological injuries, because the alternative view of trauma has historically been it's maladaptive coping. It's you're not resilient. There's something wrong with you that you didn't get through this experience, you know, more whole, right? So the emergence of moral injury and all of the recent research about PTSD is really giving a lot of support to the idea that trauma is a literal injury. It's a real physical injury, just like a broken leg. And the one service in the United States military that I think has really done anything good about stigma, it's not actually a service, but Special Operations Command, SOCOM. So that's Navy SEALs and Green Beret. And the way they have it, of course, they have been blessed with enormous resources. So they get way more money than anybody else in the military. So that makes it easier for them. But what they have done is they have married psychological fitness and health to physical health and fitness.
Yes.
And they have some of their most effective psychological support people are the physical trainers. And so they use the gym as a place to promote total health. And the other thing that SOCOM did, besides focusing on the total person fitness, is bringing the families in. That it will not work without the families engaged.
Absolutely. I
Anything
absolutely
else?
agree
Are
with
there
that.
other points on that question for existing veterans?
I absolutely agree with it because it's exactly what our program is designed to do. You know, we come in as veterans and athletes with a closed mind all the time. And I like to tell people when they come in, how many times you wake up and you take a deep breath before you walk out the door to get ready for the day? Like, right? I'm putting up that wall, I'm putting up that mental wall to protect myself, my emotional, my mental state, so that I'm not going to be attacked. If somebody attacks me or somebody tries to get inside of me and ruin my day, I'm gonna block it, right? When you come into our program at MVP every Wednesday, we do a workout for that main purpose of bringing down that mental wall so that when we're done and you get those endorphins going and all that, you know, everything's pumping in you, you sit down on our huddle, you sit down on the mat, your mind is more open to the conversation than you would have been if you just walked in cold. And so everything we do, our workouts are established to hold each other accountable, right? Like I got to keep doing a plank until my guy's done doing a wall ball or you know, something. Like we always work in teams. We always holding each other accountable. We're always pushing each other. Again, it's at your own pace, so you don't hurt yourself, right? But at the end of the day, it's, you know, that peer support, that peer accountability, and setting that mindset up so that you're more receptive to the conversation. Because if you just come in and you're not worked out, and yeah, you may get in the conversation if you're there, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to really take in what conversation was had, what somebody may have said. You're not going to align with somebody that's there, and that's the whole point. And that's exactly what we do. It's, I mean, to a T, exactly what we do. So I appreciate you saying that because, and to go to like what, you know, what I would say to a veteran is, don't have a closed mind. If you really want help, open yourself up to that conversation, open yourself up to those services that are out there, and really feel comfortable stating that you need help, because you can't get it if you're not asking for it. And if you're sheltering yourself away, nobody's going to know you need it.
I think, I know we're close. This is a great discussion. I could do this for all day. Unfortunately, we are close to being out of time. We're going to flash up a slide for all of our viewers today, because there are resources that are available for you, regardless of what position you're in your transition, regardless of where you come at this from. I think we'll start with the Veterans Crisis Hotline, 1-800-273-8255, press 1. That's probably the most immediate line for help on the page, and one that we definitely wanted to highlight. But there's a lot of people that we partner with, and there's a lot of resources out there for existing veterans as we sort of tackle this problem, and survivors, as we talked about earlier. We've talked, and Sergio's talked about it today, emerging vets and players. Do that for professional athletes and get that with combat veterans, connecting them together. Uniform comes off, providing them with a new team to assist them with their transition. And you see the website there. The mission continues. Love this mission and love their partnership and involvement in this. They're connecting veterans with under-resourced communities. They have a vision for all veterans with a desire to continue their service, to be part of a nationwide movement and transform communities. Team Red, White, and Blue as well. This is a great organization, and it exists to guide veterans through that journey with real-life kind of virtual opportunities and focus on building a healthier lifestyle. One Tribe Foundation is raising awareness and combat suicide by empowering veterans and first responders and their families through traditional and non-traditional therapies. Very great organization as well. I know Tess talked about it in our panel today, the TAPS program. So talking about the survivors for a second. It's a compassionate care and comprehensive resources for all those that are grieving the death of a military or veteran loved one. I've met a lot of great TAPS members here over the last 2 years that have watched a broadcast like this and reached out. So just wanted to show those resources real quick. And as I close out first, let me just say thank you all to our panel. Dr. Nash are joining virtually, and all 3 of you in studio. Tess, it was so good to see you again, and congratulations
Thank you.
on your new baby. And Don and Sergio, thank you guys for joining us and participating. Can I get a real-time commitment to do this again if we were to do this again next year and keep this effort going? I mean, our mission is, I want to be talking about our gains in the next 5 years. I want to be talking about how we've now been able to impact this problem when we're seeing trends go the right direction. And you got our commitment at DIRECTV and my personal commitment that we're going to stay with it until we see that trend. But I do want to thank you guys all for joining. I want to thank everybody on the phone for joining today. And please help us to continue to raise awareness to this problem and to continue to save veterans' lives. Thank you.